Good evening, it's Goldie. Today is May the 22nd, 2010, and today we are going to, I've got my friend Swill on the other line, and he's going to talk with us tonight, and I kind of want to go through a couple of items. This is going to be an actual classic rant without outline. There's a couple of things I want to go ahead and define, and Swill and I have discussed this before, but we need to go ahead and go through a little bit of a background of something that I call the commons. The commons, as it's been written by Garrett Hardin, it was originally, say, a field wrapped around a village, and it was a public field, and you would run your cattle there. And in times of underpopulation and underutilization of resources, there was never a problem nor a need for regulation of this green, let's call it, the commons. And as population increases and more people run their cattle on the commons, it becomes completely decimated. The incentive, of course, in a free market is to run your cattle wherever it is cheapest to run them. And the cheapest place would be the common area that has no cost associated with it. And in the beginning, say in Connecticut on the Mianus River, when people went ahead and had their tanneries for their shoe production areas, they were able to dump their crap into the Mianus River at will, and it polluted the river, created disease, etc. And what we have seen over the years and through discussions is that a couple of things are things that we can agree on are commons: water, air, land, and we will work on expanding that list, or at least I will. I do have people that disagree with me over whether other things like, say, the health of the nation may be the commons. Whether healthcare is something that actually affects the commons and therefore deserves regulation. Because what we found is that in the event that you do not have any regulation at all, you get a completely polluted commons. And so let's give the example, and I'm going to kind of discuss a little bit of the Fox News commentary when Obamacare got passed a month or so ago, and Obama was immediately going into his political mode of now we need to deal with immigration. I would have thought, and I have said in the past, that to the extent that we have limited resources in this country, which we do, and we have an expanding population, which we do, we need to be able to get our arms around the costs of things that we are going to give our people, or commons that we are going to be giving our people. So for me, the smartest thing to happen, or the smartest thing to do following the passage of a sweeping reform bill that's going to cost a lot more money to the government, not to the wealth of the nation as a whole, but to the government, is we need to get our arms around the total population that we're going to have covered by the health care plan. So I'm just going to go through a couple of things. Arizona has passed a law that in the event that you are pulled over for a lawful stop, or you're detained for a lawful stop with probable cause, and the officer has reasonable suspicion that you may be not a citizen of this country, without profiling, then you as a police officer not only have a right, but you have an obligation under the law to request documentation from the individual who is stopped to prove that they are a citizen. And if they're not, they'll send them to one of the immigration camps and deportation or administrative types of things. So I'm just going to go ahead. Today's Austin American Statesman, we had a little profile under the letters to the editor, which I always love seeing, and when I was very close to somebody who was an ACLU lobbyist when they had passed the racial profiling law in Texas in the mid-2000s, which required the DPS to write down the color of anybody that they stopped in order to determine if they were stopping more people of color, brown, black, etc. But in any event, there has been a huge turmoil since Arizona passed this particular law. And Fox, of course, loves to throw around numbers like 70% of the population of Arizona supports this law. Some percentage greater than 50% of Americans surveyed approve of this law. Yet when asked about racial profiling, they say, well, we don't want racial profiling to occur. And if our population was intelligent at all, they would understand you can't answer those two questions. The two questions go together. There's actually no way of getting the profiling. But let me just read this letter to the editor, because this is, I think this really puts it together here. And the title is Profiling Gets a Bad Rap. This is a sincere question. Why is profiling bad? Why is it politically incorrect? If a Caucasian committed a crime, would we look at African Americans or Asians as possible perpetrators? Is this not profiling? We would look where the possible suspects might be. We profile all the time. Just because we might call it something else, it's still profiling. How did it get such a bad name? I'm not going to mention this guy's name, but he's from Georgetown. He's from Williamson County. Williamson County, without insult, I'm not going to call them backward, but they rejected originally when Apple wanted to locate to the Austin area. They did not want Apple to come here because they gave benefits to same-sex partners of employees. So when somebody actually asks a rhetorical question, how did it get such a bad name? That meant that they didn't read the Constitution. They didn't take constitutional law. They didn't take social studies outside of what's been approved in the state of Texas. We won't go into that. Profiling is bad because our country never wants to, morally, I'm just going to talk about the moral consequence. Morally, you never want to single out an individual for their color, religion, race, or any other type of differentiation between the people. What I have seen is, and when originally following 9/11, and my friend Swill will probably attest to this because we had many discussions with this. I play basketball at the Downtown Y, and I had a lot of arguments about this, was that if you were white following 9/11, you were pretty much all for profiling somebody that looked brown and pulling them out of line and searching them. And because of certain protections that we do have in the Constitution and certain civil protections that we have in the Constitution, it turns out that you're not legally allowed to do that kind of profiling. Now, people are arguing that, well, what if, and this guy is saying, what is wrong with profiling? Let me tell you what's wrong with profiling. I was the only Jew where I grew up, pretty much. And Swill will attest to that as well. And luckily I was an A+ student. So when they told me, Jew boy, go chase this penny in the corner. Jew boy, go run and get some money and make me a loan. Jew boy. When they did that kind of stuff, I didn't like it at all. And I wondered, why am I being singled out? Because I'm white, I'm Caucasian, but I have a Jewish background and a Jewish name. When I came down to Texas, and I was told by my stepfather that I was going to be lynched because I was Jewish, turns out that in Texas, they don't really know what Jews are. So I've had a pretty pleasant experience here. But let me tell you what they do know. They do know what Hispanics are here. And they have various names for them that we're not going to use. They're on our no-no list for this radio show. And neither is my friend Swill. And the issue is we all agree, and Swill, here's where I would say, step in, please. We all agree, so let's go through and hit a part of what the immigration problem is today. What do you feel it is? You live up in Connecticut.
So as we were just discussing prior to the start of the show, immigration is really about something much larger, and it's kind of it goes back to the commons. It's about a population problem. And all around the world we have a population problem, and Mexico is no exception. In fact, we have a population problem inside of this country in various places. Wherever you're having people having children out of any proportion to their ability to pay for them and saying, here's society, take care of my child, and you ask why, and they go, because you have a problem. And you start, any safety net that you have in place does start to get frayed and then at risk. And also, people start to develop a really callous attitude towards people who are part of that, really what is an overpopulation problem. Now, Mexico produces a lot of people, produces a lot of poor people, and obviously they don't have the jobs to employ all those people. We all know that. And it's a very sad humanitarian situation. However, you have to ask yourself the question, does Mexico have the right to tell America, United States, to employ, feed, clothe, and house my people?
See, now, and that's a great point that you bring up, because that was also what we were discussing and have discussed in the past. If you were to actually substitute in the word America for Mexico, and all of those things and those expectations and those ideas that I deserve, those are as prevalent in this country as they are, at least as to that perception that you're saying, as to Mexican citizens that may be wanting to come up here and going, or the government having policies that don't close off their borders or worry about their people. We have the same type of problem here.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's no question. We have attitudes that are sometimes worse.
Not even a question. I mean, I was in getting a haircut.
Or people who have been born here and have been here for several generations, and they can be of any race.
Of course, and in fact,
any race or ethnicity. We have pockets. It could be an inner city. It could be in Appalachia. It could be in northern Texas. Wherever you have people who are in this culture, this is the welfare culture, part of the so-called welfare lobby that I think Obama represents first, last, and always. Doesn't make him evil, but I think he represents it. We'll push that to the side. But you've got that kind of entitlement problem exhibited all over America in various forms, races, and shapes.
not even a question. I mean, I'll give you the example. The main example that I had, which got me to one of my crazy theories, as people will say it, although it seems to make a lot more sense. Originally in this country, as the tax code evolved, we needed, when we had high mortality rates, infant mortality rates, children dying, you would die of an infection, you didn't have neosporin, you didn't have inoculations against things. You needed children on your farm, to farm you needed children.
For labor.
We needed the labor. And in the beginning, you get a child tax care credit. You get a credit, an exemption for each, for the more children that you have. And when I was getting a haircut, it was right after the woman had gotten had the octuplets, and I posed a question to the person who was cutting my hair, as well as to the other 3 people that were listening in on the conversation, because my voice carries a little bit, and it was, do you feel that we as a society should pay for all 8 of her children? And the person who was cutting my hair immediately said yes, and the other 2 people agreed. And when and I felt out of them an I deserve. And I'm not going to say it was a welfare type of thing, because it was, these people work. They work for minimum wage and tips. So we do have workers that are having children willy-nilly. I mean, I have chosen to not have children at this moment. You know why? Because I can't afford them. I know how much it's going to cost to have a child. But the number of people that have children that then think, well, I'm just going to get by, and if not, then I'm going to get my government to give me another tax care credit, or I'm going to get WIC, or I'm going to get aid to families with dependent children. I think that we have a very severe problem here, and it is inspired by our tax code and policies. And it's just the general population problem that you were mentioning. So there's just a general population problem here. And here's my theory. I'm willing to pay for 2 of your kids. I'm willing to pay for public schooling for 2 of your kids. I'm willing to pay for Obamacare for 2 of your kids. I'm willing to pay for Social Security for 2 of your kids. And that's it. After those 2 kids, I want you paying. I want you paying me. I want you paying the school district. You know, we're worried about a mandate forcing you to buy health care. I'm actually calling for a mandate forcing you to pay for schooling for any more than 2 children.
Yeah, well, you know, the whole issue of the tax code being out of whack and gradually over time taking people away from any sense of responsibility for things really boils down to people not having ownership. And if you're not paying taxes, well, you don't have any ownership in anything. So therefore, you don't care what the profit and loss statement looks like at the end of the year. You don't care. You don't have any ownership. You don't pay into the system. So you're not worried about how healthy that system is financially. And that's one of the big problems. That's why we fight about flat taxes and Neil Ford's, Carl Lindner, consumption tax, which has a lot of merit. It could use some tweaking, but, you know, I digress. But
No. But I mean, that is a good point to that sense of entitlement that people have. If they don't have a dog in the hunt, they're not going to care.
they don't care.
And if they're not participating, they're not going to care. I mean, and that is obviously a problem of the path to citizenship.
Yeah.
Because there's no incentive for you, well, I guess, I mean, in order to get the services, there's an incentive there.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to go ahead and bring your kid to a doctor, you may have to show that you're a citizen.
You know, going back to the commons, I mean, you know, one of the things about the failure of the commons, and it's a great example that you brought up, and what it was about cattle. And people could use it, and then it was abused. But I guess the first thing you'd point to in looking at that scenario is nobody had any ownership of that land.
That's right.
If there were ownership, there would be stewardship, and people would then look out for it. So you could say, really, when you have a commons, you're almost functioning in a communal or socialistic environment where there's no ownership.
And the disincentive. Yeah, how do you take care of it?
Enterprise.
Yeah, yep.
So, I mean, it's private property rights, and ownership will give you the stewardship that will make that land survive.
There you go.
Then you could have an argument about that all day with a real leftist about what would produce the more desired outcome, which would be the preservation of the commons. But, you know.
Well, what we've definitely known is that in the situation with the commons, once you get it into a place where it is being overutilized, that is where you need regulation. So, as we knew growing up, Long Island Sound was a cesspool because everybody just dumped their sewage there. This is before the Clean Water Act.
Yeah.
They dumped it in there. And when enough people that had enough power in the government, when I say power, political power, said, you know what? This is a cesspool and people are getting sick off of this. We certainly can't eat the fish that are out of here. We need regulation of it. So, I mean, we're kind of walking our way around this entire issue of immigration and profiling. Again, I have absolutely no problem regulating the total number of people that receive services, commons services.
Yeah.
So I have no problems with that. But there is no question to me, having been the limited victim as a Caucasian Jew of discrimination, that when you hear 70% of Arizonans are okay with this law, you never hear what percentage of them are white. And Fox News, Hannity trotted out in one of his little town hall meetings when he was talking to Sarah Palin. It was writing that thing about 2 to 3 weeks ago. He trotted out a Hispanic older gentleman and his son. And they're all for the law. Now, they were probably like Eric Holder. They absolutely had not read it. Okay? And the idea is, and this goes into my privacy surveillance talk that I was talking about the cameras. And when I was discussing the cameras, I felt that when you go out and you try and get community input or you survey the population, there are times when your survey recipients do not, I don't feel, have the right to opine. So, for example,
if you think it's messing up, it's corrupting the poll, because you're looking for the truth. I think there's one thing that you and I are always looking for, it's the truth.
Well, we're definitely looking for the truth, but before you ask a question like that,
Yeah.
I mean, when I say loosely 90% of the population is ignorant, whatever it is, it's 30% or 20% or 10%. I mean, we took constitutional law for a full year, and it's a hard subject. Racial profiling, the idea of asking a group and a population of what is racial profiling, they don't even know what it is.
Well,
So in any event, hold on.
Just by way of the Constitution, constitutional law, what are we relying, protections against profiling, relying on what amendment?
14th.
I was going to say 14th Amendment.
14th, and then we would talk about unreasonable search and seizure. That's always there. So the idea that they have probable cause, which meant he spoke Spanish when I stopped him, and so therefore, and he was speeding, so I'm going to check out his citizenship. Or he did an incorrect turn.
Here's what I want to ask, or put in here. You could profiling when there is a crime in action, like a robbery.
Well, like with this guy.
Or a high-speed chase where the police don't know what the guy looks like, and they go to a guy in a street corner and they go, "Hey, what'd you see?" Because it's kind of, you're in hot pursuit in a violent situation.
I totally agree, and that's what the.
I think we'd all agree. I mean, that's one of those things where you start mentioning a guy's race, you're not going to get in trouble for it.
I'm not worried. I'm not worried about that. And this letter to the editor, he mixes up those two different things. He's saying if a Caucasian had committed a crime, you're not going to be looking for somebody that's black or brown. You're going to be profiling. You're only going to be looking for a white guy in the Camaro because it was a white guy that did it.
This guy's only trying to whip up people. He's angry, and he fires off a letter to the editor. He just wants to get.
Yeah, no, and he didn't get me particularly angry. All he did was reiterate for me the ignorance of the issue, because, for example, if you watch Fox News right now, their complaint on why they are okay with the Arizona law is because Obama is not doing enough to secure our borders. It's a political argument that they're going to use in November, saying that the Democrats are not for security. Okay? If you are against the Arizona law, that means you are against securing our borders. And we know that's not true. That's a political argument, but that's the argument that you're hearing. You hear it from Sarah Palin, you hear it from Hannity. So it's the Republican mantra.
Well, the whole thing is kind of a forced argument, and it puts one party at a disadvantage. Just in the way you said it, even as a big conservative, quote unquote, know, it is a forced argument. It's kind of, you can see the unfairness of the way it's been put on the Democrats.
Oh, heck yeah. I mean, this idea...
Sort of, the semantics here are not very good.
No, they're never good. They're never good. And so, like, when we say the word conservative, you know, in one of these shows, we will define what a real conservative is. Is it a Goldwater conservative? It's certainly not Sean Hannity. It's certainly not Bill O'Reilly. It's definitely not Rush Limbaugh. These guys are drunken sailors during the Bush years spending. So, but them and Fox just doing, and again, the 70% number is an accurate number that they reported. And when they show that, then it's like, well, it even pushes people to say, you know what, I support that Arizona law, because at least they're doing something. The problem is, and let me get back to the reason why I feel that these people don't even have a right to opine on the subject, is that to be the victim of racial profiling, or to be the victim of a camera being pointed into your window, which was my point under the privacy argument for the surveillance camera, was that no one has a right to grant the government the right to shine a camera in my window. So to the extent that there's crime going on outside on the street in my neighborhood, we can certainly get cops walking around out there, but you can't grant the cops the right to hop my fence without a search warrant. Similarly, I feel that you do not have the right to opine on that law unless you are potentially one of the victims who is going to be stopped and racially profiled, even though, of course, the law says they're not allowed to racially profile. It's really a...
You know, I know the point you're trying to make, but then again, you're kind of saying, well, damn free speech and damn the public discourse.
No.
I know what you're saying, even though you're not saying it.
Of course, I'm all for free speech. I'm for Nazis marching. I'm all for that. I'm for the KKK marching. My point is that the discussion that you and I are having is not the discussion that you hear on Fox, and it's not the discussion that you hear on the other stations as well, because CNN reported that same thing. And the discourse that they're having is, do you like the law? Now, in order to say, do you like the law, you have to dissect the law to determine whether or not the prohibition against racial profiling can even occur. What is the remedy if you were racially profiled? And none of that gets discussed. And when I say you don't have the right to opine, of course you have the right to opine. I feel, however, you don't have the right to use that survey number without going through all of that big background.
No, well, you're sorry for the ignorance.
Of course.
The ignorant commentary and possibly rigged numbers and all the rest of it that you come out and you're like, well, where are you getting those numbers? I don't know. Sean Hannity said it 15 times, on Tuesday evening.
Well, actually, most people that, I'm going to digress for a second, most people that watch Fox don't admit they watch Fox, but you'll hear keywords like socialist or, communist or Nazi, words that...
I was saying those things years ago.
But, when you hear those keywords coming out without explanation, like if somebody just calls me a socialist because I was, during the primaries between Hillary and Obama, I was just discussing the relative merits of who was more electable during the primaries. And a guy called me a socialist, and I was like, do you have 2 hours and we'll discuss, to what extent our system is socialist, to what extent there's government interference and incentives given to individual companies, to what extent is the government handing out our federal monies to companies, freely and willy-nilly. No, I was not trying to say, well, I guess I really am. If you're and so I'm using the small r right, okay?
Yeah.
I'm saying you have the large R right to opine on anything. You, of course, can. But I don't feel that you have the small r right to get on the airwaves and say 70% of the people in Arizona support this law without them having attended a class on constitutional law. And I'm being serious about that.
Well,
It's too fundamental of a right. It's like the right to privacy and the right against unreasonable search and seizure for cameras.
yeah.
And they're like, well, I'm not guilty. You guys can put a camera on me. And I'm like, I'm all okay with you granting anybody the right to put a camera on you. You just don't have a right to put a camera on me. You don't have a right to grant them the right to put a camera on me. Similarly, you don't have the right to allow your police force to racially profile. Okay, and I'm going to use that because that's the only way that they can determine some reasonable suspicion that the person in the car is not a citizen. What else are you going to use except the color of the skin and the language that they're speaking?
Yeah, I mean, unless, of course, you're going to put in a law that everybody who gets pulled over, again, has to be treated the same way. It's the same thing. If you're going to ask for certain documents, first your license. Guy doesn't have a license, I suppose that's a problem. But, everybody has to be treated equally under the law. White, black, yellow, brown, purple. Everybody's got to be treated the same way. Has to be a rational, even application. That's what you always try to do in these, rights matters.
Right, but that always goes down the road of the roadblocks. Okay,
Yeah.
The way they've gotten around that problem with roadblocks and not profiling on roadblocks, at least in Texas, is they stop every car.
Yeah.
So you're being pulled over when there is no suspicion of a crime because they know that they can satisfy the racial profiling law here and they can satisfy the probable cause problem of pulling people over by pulling everybody over.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to argue that I don't want to live in that society.
No, you probably don't. And that gets to something we've talked about, which is DWI roadblocks.
That's exactly the DWI
I'd love to
roadblocks.
see the ACLU go after these states who do that.
They do. They do. They did here in Texas, and you know what? We don't see those roadblocks here. They've now done in Texas. They've done the Dracula law, where they can actually get a search warrant issued to require the taking of your blood if you refuse to do the breathalyzer test. But in any event, no, the ACLU has been a staunch opponent of these general roadblocks. And I don't think we want to get to that society, that kind of society, where everybody is being stopped and everything about them is being checked.
Yeah, I know. And the problem always comes up, police power comes in when there is some, you could call it almost like a force majeure, but, constitutions always get, or founding articles always get stomped on after a tipping point. If you feel there's a tipping point here, I think the thing that set the immigration problem off was all the violence that suddenly started happening along the Texas border. And people said, wait a minute, not only do we have this immigration problem, but now we've got violence occurring, guys shooting it out, people coming over the fence and having battles, or invading homes or whatever.
Of course.
And there's a ton of drugs. Now, you know what? This whole border, it really sounds like, hearing this thing through the news and everything, seeing the clips and all the rest of it, reading the stories in the paper, this sounds like this is really an out-of-control situation. And then governments are asked to do something. And there you go.
No, and I'm with you. We'll get into that drug war thing and and who's supporting the drug war and which drug companies are paying senators legally to support this useless prohibition and drug war. That's a part of the Fox message, of course. But I just pulled up. This was a poll on 5/13/10 that 59% of all Americans approve of Arizona's new law cracking down on illegal immigrants, and only 32% disapprove. Again, when you see these questions, and how they're done, in the 21st of May, most in the survey say that Hispanics suffer from discrimination. And 61% of people overall said Hispanics face significant discrimination. Now, if you were asking your poll and your survey in connection with, well, do you feel that other races or Hispanics or blacks or Asians suffer discrimination, and then following that question you ask them, do you feel that the Arizona law is okay, and you get a number like 70%, then you see exactly where this thing is going. And again, in this one, they're not separating who they're asking as to whether or not it's an okay thing to have happen. You're not saying this is of whites. It's 70% of whites. Well, I can tell you who it's not in Arizona. They're not surveying anybody who's brown. You know why? Because they think they might get asked for their papers. Where are your papers?
Papa.
You know that's happening.
Yeah, well then it's not a real poll.
It's just like the census.
By the way, how many legal Hispanic residents are there, American citizens are there in Arizona?
Yeah,
and Texas, and what percentage are they?
I don't know, but that's
Still,
that.
we've got Hispanic families down there.
Well, and that's the real poll. That's the real poll that you want to take. And what I'm bringing up is
you want to go poll those guys and see what they think, because no less a guy than Cesar Chavez, who was the big migrant advocate. He said illegal immigration and leaving these borders open is chaos. It's leading to a lot of abuse of, his people, Mexicans. He said this years ago. And he said we need to have an orderly, documented system here so that we're not just, by the way, there were several things he talked about. One was just the economics of it and the fact that he couldn't keep the wages up for the existing migrant laborers who came in if he kept flooding, California, in this case, up in the Salinas Valley. He kept flooding it with labor. Well, no one would have a decent wage. And so he said, wait a minute. We need some order here. We need something rational in place.
No, not even a question, and that is, that's a part of the tragedy of the commons, and that I don't disagree, you and I do not disagree that we have to get our arms around the problem. What my main point of this discussion is that this is such a significant right. It's a right against unreasonable search and seizure that even though it may have some positive effect, you may find some undocumented illegals that you're going to be able to ship back. You're going to find a few of them. The chilling effect, what if you're Hispanic and you're not sure about your papers? Okay, it's not an easy system to be a legal immigrant here. That one of the chilling effects is that if you witnessed a crime, you're not going to step forward. The police, in fact,
unintended consequences of
in fact, one of the police groups, I can't remember whether it was a sheriff's group or a police chief group, was saying we definitely do not support this because we're going to get less cooperation out of that community. Because if you're legal, who knows? Who knows? I think I'm legal. I have a Social Security number, but I sure don't want to be asked for my papers. I guess they have a right to it if I'm trying to get a service, but I certainly don't want to be walking along and knowing that I'm in the group that they're not allowed to racially profile, but if they have reasonable suspicion, they're allowed to profile me and ask for my papers.
No, and that is it's the main topic. The other thing is, well then, look, you're going to get into other things too about immigration, a more humanitarian way of getting these numbers down, even voluntary remigration or, reunion, if you will. Say you protected all these things, but what if you go the route? What's going to happen and what's going to be the outcry here, even from a rights standpoint, even though rights may not being infringed on at all, when you start to say start fining people heavily if they have illegal workers, if you start cutting off the free education, medicine, any food stamps, use of public housing, anything else, when you start doing that,
You get hit from the left.
you're going to get hit. The left is going to scream like hell, and
No, I agree. But this is where we're going to, this is where we diverge from Fox and from CNN and from various other places, in that we understand that it's the promise of jobs that brings the people here illegally.
and I say reform the economy down there and put a lot of pressure on those guys to start employing their own people.
Well, that was, I don't know if you had seen the South Park about future people, where in the future everybody spoke a mixture, they had like a brownish, yellowish, orange skin. They all spoke a mixture of Spanish and Chinese. And the moral of the story that came out of that South Park episode, because it was like they want to either ship them all back to the future because they were earning 10 cents an hour and then putting it in the bank for their future relatives. The moral of that story was, we need to, at the very least, help create jobs where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And disincentivize or drop the incentives that are here. So I have absolutely no problem. I have no problem with the existing laws that are on the books in various states and federal laws, that if you hire somebody and you haven't checked their citizenship, you're guilty of a crime.
Yeah.
That's how you do it, and you enforce that law. That is one way to take care of that problem. Now, when we get to the other type of more basic services, like refusing health care to somebody who's got a cut off leg and the artery is shooting blood.
Emergency services, you're going to take care of people.
You're going to take care of people, but are they going to get an H1N1 flu shot for free? Like I was saying that,
That too for free.
do we want to give it to them? Well, we do know that there's some number, let's call it 12 million people right now are here illegally. Whatever the number is, doesn't matter. Let's use 12 million.
Yeah.
What's funny is that when you hear from Lou Dobbs or some of these other nutcases, that we're just going to ship them back.
Yeah. Well, it's
How-
practicality.
You can't do it.
Tough, and you're going to,
It can't be done.
I got news for you. I mean, I'm not crazy about us allowing a lot of illegal people in here without a vote being taken. I mean, there's a lot of issues of fairness. One is legal immigration, people waiting in line. The other is a transformation of culture. Our friend Dr. Savage is not wrong when he talks about borders, language, and culture. I mean, I'm not a nut about it, but when you choose a group, you allow one group. If you can identify these guys as a group, that could be another argument, because the term Hispanic is way too big a net, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway,
No, go ahead.
when you just don't have the ability to define them really as one way. But if you're going to change your society so fundamentally without there being a dialogue, how Newt Gingrich talks about, without having the conversation, I think that rubs people the wrong way.
No, and I'm all for that.
Not
As
fair.
far,
It doesn't smack of fairness. Now, is there potentially prejudice in that argument?
of course,
Sure. I mean,
whenever you single a group, you're
mass
prejudiced.
migration of people, one culture into another, or one culture down there, it's already a culture of Hispanics in the South, so it's not as dramatic as one might think. But it is fair to ask the question.
I have no problems asking the question in terms of legal immigration, okay? I have absolutely no problems asking that question. And as far as I'm concerned, we already have too many people in this country. This is something that my ACLU friend and I always disagreed with, which was she felt that we had plenty of resources and we could let in everybody. But
well, she agrees with Rush Limbaugh then.
yeah, well, yeah.
You know,
well,
and that's one of the huge issues I have with him. This old world, we could have 10 billion in it, and if we only had the right system, of course, it's free enterprise capitalism everywhere.
well, all right, let's
Poor devil. I don't agree with him on any. You can outstrip any economic system's ability to pay for the poor.
Of course. Well, let's again, we're talking about several different things. One is, what do you do with the people that are here that are illegal as of June 1, 2010, okay? If you were going to pass a law. Then secondarily, what do you do to seal the borders? Who the heck knows what you do there? And number three, what are the numbers of actual and types and countries, which by definition is going to be racism, okay, and prejudice? Which countries are you going to allow? You know, we already have these numbers. We've had these numbers all along. You know, there was only a certain number of Irish let in the 1800s. And so without trying to mix those things up, I don't think, and tell me if you disagree with this, I don't see a method of finding, capturing, and returning the 12 million illegals.
No, no, it's only through some of the means I was talking about. It's seeing what more humanitarian disincentives will do.
Okay.
To lock people up, take people at gunpoint, get busloads of people. I mean, I can't see it happening. I mean,
well, you'd have to racially profile also.
well, there you go. You got a racially profile, but then again, you do have this problem.
No, I understand there's a problem.
It's like
But
it's a real catch-22. You got some big problems.
But a white Russian is coming in from Mexico, who's coming through South America. We want to stop that guy as much as we want to stop Mexican citizens from coming over.
Well, what we were trying to tell the Bush administration was you seal that border because you got hit on 9/11. You seal all your borders. If you really want homeland security, you don't go fight in foreign lands. You seal your borders and you stop your immigration or severely limit immigration into the country until you figure out how to create security.
Right.
And I said all liberals, you can't have it both ways.
Well, and
Have open borders and no war overseas.
Right, and I, you know, that open borders argument, I've never liked it from the left. I've never liked it, okay? And I'm not sure how much of that we're hearing from corporations supporting that, who are using the cheap labor, or
you know, we got construction, restaurants,
landscaping, everything that does that. I mean, there is no question that anybody who's ever bought a property over the last 30 years has benefited from illegal immigration. Even if they didn't use illegals on their job, it has kept the rates low. So I want to get to this main point. I am not sure that you can create a path to citizenship for the 12 million until you've stopped the flow.
Correct.
Like, that's why I used the phrase June 1st, 2010. So until you come up with a method of stopping the flow, we won't be able to get our arms around the commons and the cost of the services that we want to provide to all the citizens that are currently here and the 12 million that we pretty much practically know we can't ship back. Just can't be done. Can't be done. Okay, so it appears that we need to do two things for sure to at least get us to a point where we can figure out how much our healthcare system is going to cost. And that is, you've got to seal the border, and whether sealing the border is creating total disincentives for somebody to come here or building a wall that's actually secure. There's plenty of arguments that say you cannot build a secure wall.
You don't need to build a big ugly wall. You can just police it and man it. I mean, the guys with water bottles in their hands and, you know, backyard chairs, folding chairs prove that.
Well, it's a people's number. I mean, you could potentially get, you know, if you're going to do a TVA like in the 30s in the Great Depression, since we're in the Great Recession, you can put people to work. I mean, the dollars, we know that.
But the big ugly, I don't want the big ugly fence down there that looks like crap. Police it.
Well, right now, it would be cheaper to just have people policing it. That is true. It would be cheaper. Not even a question.
Have troops and something more passive, and you know what you can do? You can have stations, guys come across, and the guy's about to die from dehydration and malnutrition. You can give the guy some food. You might even put him in a tent, in a cot, or some facility for a while, until the Mexican government gets some transportation up here to take these guys back. So, it's like, you don't have to be cruel about it, but you can be firm.
Well, we have to be firm.
I mean, there's this, we're all
We have limited resources.
sanitarian here, and I think that's it.
We don't want to kill anybody. And again, I had a friend of mine that talked about, he didn't want to be required to buy health insurance. He just wanted to use cash, okay?
Yeah.
And I gave him the example. So in other words, your leg gets cut off and your artery is spewing blood. So then is it okay if I don't give you services? And he's like, that was the end of his argument. We're done here.
Because
But
there's a socialized component.
yes, and we know, I mean,
Emergency services.
okay, so that we know there's a couple of things.
He'll be billed.
Right. So there's a couple of things that we know we need to do. We need to get our arms around the total number of people that we are going to give services to as a country. And
Absolutely.
we can't ship back the 12 million. It can't be done. I'm going to assert that, okay? I'm Mr. Anecdotal is one of my nicknames.
Today, as of today, we think that
Can't be done.
going to be a difficult thing to do.
And we want to enforce, we do want to enforce against employers, because that's the spigot. The main spigot is, the argument that they're coming here for free health care and free food. There's not that much free health care, and there's definitely not that much free food.
I think what happens is it doesn't take a lot of a quote-unquote group of illegals to consume that much to send a lot of these municipalities and states into a tailspin financially. I mean, in other words, the tipping point's easy to reach. If only 10% of them or 15% were consuming, a social benefit here and a social benefit there, it could be too much given the existing population you have.
But we already have that same exact problem anyway with the higher number of unemployed or the octuplets.
Yeah, it doesn't,
We already have that tipping point. We are at the tipping point.
The biggest items are like criminal justice and education. Education's the biggie because kids are here, as you said at the beginning. Kids are here, getting education, and you're having children. You're here, and those kids are going straight into elementary school or pre-K, and the local municipality. By the way, that's an unfunded mandate foisted on us by Washington. That's an unfunded mandate right there. If you want to talk about unfunded mandates. So anyway, these guys are going into school, and that's costing a lot of money.
Well, we already know that, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to come up with a couple